Deconstruction. It's a word that is used a lot today in the church and in Christian circles. You might hear about podcasts that are all about deconstruction, or you might read articles that try to explain deconstruction, or maybe you personally are going through what you would call deconstruction. And when I am kind of dealing and thinking about what deconstruction looks like or means, you get a lot of different kind of viewpoints on it, and you get a lot of different kind of approaches to what it actually is or what it isn't, or what it results in, or if it's good or if it's bad. There's a lot of different ways that people deal with and talk about deconstruction. And this channel, this YouTube channel, Rethinking Christianity, and the podcast that we have is started and was started out of my own personal journey of faith through doubt and deconstruction, and now I am reconstructing. So I want to talk about what deconstruction is, and I have some clips that I kind of want to play and kind of observe. I don't really have a lot of comments to make on them, but I just want to observe some of the different ways that deconstruction is approached. I have a clip by, I don't really actually know the name of the guy, I just saw it on TikTok and I downloaded it. I thought it was an interesting viewpoint on deconstruction. I have some clips from Lecrae talking about his deconstruction, and then Pete Enns gives some interesting insight on how he views deconstruction. For me personally, I think deconstruction is misunderstood. I think deconstruction is, I think it's a really hot word right now, and I think it just kind of gets thrown around and blamed for things that maybe it shouldn't be blamed for. And I think a lot of times people that don't understand deconstruction give it a bad rap, but I think that deconstruction is very necessary for anyone that's following Jesus, and I will explain some of that later. But first, I want to get into this TikTok clip. So this is an interesting viewpoint on deconstruction. This guy, he gives his reasoning for deconstruction, and I think in a one-sided viewpoint, and I don't think it kind of gets at the heart of it. So let's check this out.
How many people do we have falling away from the faith right now? All because a church hurt their feelings. Now I thought I was done. I thought I was done. I'm not done. Do you know why deconstructionism exists? Because discipleship didn't. And you got these people more in love with your church than in love with Jesus. And so when the church hurt them, they couldn't even stay committed to Jesus? Your pastor failed and you failed? Your small groups leader didn't let you have a small group, and you don't like the whole church no more? Not the church that didn't let you have a small group. The whole Big C church is off limits to you now. You got food poisoning at a restaurant. Did you stop going to restaurants? No, you stopped going to that restaurant. So don't sit here and tell me that I'm a deconstructionist and I just don't like the church anymore and I don't believe in Jesus anymore. You never did. You believed in your pastor. You didn't believe in Jesus. You believed in your pastor. And woe be to the pastor that makes people fall in love with them instead of fall in love with Jesus.
So that's interesting. So he kind of essentially approaches it from a church hurt kind of viewpoint, that people are hurt by the church and they're hurt by pastors, and it is not Jesus that hurts them, but it's the church, which is very true for many people. Many people have an experience where they are hurt by leaders in the church. They're hurt by people in the church. And, I think something that might be ignored here a little bit is this idea that, that's not a good reason to walk away from the faith. For some people, it can be very traumatic, and it can be very hard for them to trust the sources in which they base their faith on. So what I mean by that is, say a pastor is who they hear about God from. Say a pastor or small group leaders who they have had help build their faith. And when maybe they lose trust in that, they lose trust in the source of a lot of the information about their faith. Now, should someone's faith be rooted in just an individual or an institution? No, I don't think that is helpful at all, and I think we do see a lot of results of that. But I think that deconstruction can't just be whittled down into simply saying that you were hurt, you can't just give up on the church, and that's the end of it. And I don't think it's very helpful to tell people you never believed in Jesus in the first place. Because for me personally, when I have gone through different seasons of my faith, there was a time where when I was in a lot of doubt, I always genuinely believed in Jesus, but there were moments where I felt like I wasn't sure if I believed in God or Jesus or anything anymore. But that didn't mean I never believed in Jesus. It just meant in this season that I was in that I was really struggling with a lot of questions and a lot of doubts. And so this is kind of a viewpoint that some people take, and this is a viewpoint that some people have, where for some people, because there is an obsession with maybe church leaders or someone gets hurt by the church, that's it. I think deconstruction is more than that, because there can be deconstruction that comes from church hurt, like this guy mentioned, but there can also be deconstruction that comes from unraveling of like philosophy and viewpoints. Viewpoints can change because people, maybe they come across a book that opens their perspective to a different biblical interpretation. Maybe somebody has a different thinking or a different viewpoint on a theological stance that they at one point had. There's more to it than just simply like just walking away from the faith because someone gets hurt or because someone just simply never really believed in the first place. I think that for many people that are deconstructing, their viewpoint is that they are trying their best to hold on to the faith, and they're trying their best to do whatever they can to stay Christian. So we have this viewpoint where this guy kind of mentions that for some people, church hurt causes their deconstruction, and he believes that you just weren't discipled. You never really believed in Jesus in the first place. And this is obviously a clip taken out of context, so he may have more empathy for these people than what's being presented in that video, so I do want to mention that. I think you can kind of see the username of that TikTok. If you want to go check out their stuff, go do so you can find out some more about that. I'm not saying that this is that one sole viewpoint that he has on deconstruction, but in that clip, that is what he presented. The second clip I kind of want to look at, and I'm going to fast forward into a little bit of it, is Lecrae. So Lecrae, actually, he recently had an album that he put out where there's a song on there called Deconstruction. If you get a chance, the album is Church Close 4, I believe it is, and he has a song called Deconstruction, and it's a really good song. He talks about his personal deconstruction, the things that he has struggled with, and where he's at now in his reconstruction of faith. Lecrae, I have had a huge admiration for him and his work, and I really like this recent album. But I do want to look at this video real quick. I think it's really interesting. I think that he definitely hits on some things that a lot of people struggle with. So let's look at that.
Construction. Oh my gosh, that's like a curse word in Christendom right now. That and woke. That woke is like a cuss word in certain. First of all, can I talk about woke real quick? Let's be real. In the black community, that's like a term that is old. We don't even really use that like that no more. So like to make a whole doctrine off of it is kind of wild to me. Whatever's clever, you know what I'm saying? Like it would be weird for me to be like, woke. It's like, that's so 2016 in my mind. If y'all still using that, then y'all do you. My thought process on this is sometimes words or semantics can really mess stuff up because we put way more into the word than it means.
So that's very, very true. So that's kind of what this video, the point of me making this video is to kind of give some perspective on deconstruction, not to like explain the whole thing, but to give some different viewpoints. And it's very easy for us to have an idea about a word rather than understand the reasons why people use that word or the reasons or the stories behind that word. So I definitely agree with Lecrae on that.
Deconstruction has become synonymous with walking away from the faith, period. That's all it is. It's deconstruction. Oh, atheism. That's what people see in their mind. I think it got popularized around the time, Michael Gungor kind of went through a lot of what he was going through, years back. He experienced a lot of church hurt, and he basically was like, man, I'm deconstructing and I'm just kind of walking away from the faith. And what I have seen is that oftentimes people walk away from the faith or deconstruct or step outside because they have correlated that this institutional corporate, when I say those, I mean like capitalistic, money-grabbing, culturally exclusive, politicized version of the faith is married to Jesus.
So this is actually really, really true and very, very common right now for a lot of people that they are kind of tired of the megachurch culture. They're tired of the big church, the power structures within the church. And so what he is saying is that a lot of times people make that infrastructure, that church structure, the same as following Jesus, and so they don't want anything to do with it. So that means they don't want anything to do with Jesus. And so for a lot of people, there is this kind of like moving away from the church and Christianity because of what they see in the church systems that maybe they're in, or maybe they have observed.
And so they're saying, I don't want anything to do with any of it. And they end up throwing the baby out with the bathwater oftentimes. I know because I did it too. That's right, I deconstructed. I just did not understand that even though the followers of Christ were doing all this crazy stuff that I couldn't wrap my brain around, it didn't mean that he endorsed it. And so I didn't have to throw the whole baby out with the bathwater, but we're so inundated with everything looking like the way it looks, especially in America. It's like, well, of course, don't forsake the fellowship of the assembly. That verse really does not have anything to do with going to a building with lights and cameras and songs. If you want to do that, that's great. But what that verse is really about is not forsaking the fellowship. It's like not walking away from the faith, the group of people who held you down, growing with believers. Like, look at the context of the verse. And so in America, oftentimes, where we fellowship with believers is in this institution that is on Sundays in a building. Sometimes there's coffee and there's childcare. That's just kind of the way we've set it up. But that's not like, that's a description, not a prescription of what church is. Church is people. It's the body, right?
That is very, very true. And I think that, for a lot of people, they desire a community of faithful people, like community of believers to do life with, to have honest conversations with, rather than just attending a service and listening to a pastor speak. And the way in which we view church in the United States of America is very kind of, I'd say about 98% of the time is viewed in one kind of way. Now, obviously, there has been some like growth in like church home type stuff or home church type things. But I think a lot of the stuff that people are really wrestling with and struggling with that leads to deconstruction because of any issues they have with the structures of the church is because of the structures of the church that we have in America in place that a lot of times will elevate one leader to a position of power. And it creates a weird culture where it's very, it's not really community oriented. It's very system oriented. It's very service oriented. It's very entertainment oriented. And so I think that is also very, very true, that there is this lack of community sometimes in these places. And so people get hurt. People don't like what they see, and they don't want to be a part of it.
Elders, you got deacons, you got leaders, and you got people who come together to grow. And when you're deconstructing, oftentimes, for me, it was me saying, I don't like the infrastructures that these people have built that care more about money, that care less about people or marginalized people or poor people. And so I don't want anything to do with it. And you start looking like, well, where does it exist where it's better? And oftentimes you just don't see it because you don't have access to it, you haven't been exposed to it. But I've been very fortunate to travel the world and realize that there are broken people everywhere, but there are also institutions and infrastructures that do not look like what we have created here in America. It's not to say that they're better, it's just to say that they have different issues and different struggles. And I began to realize that the struggles that we have are not necessary in other places, right? And so I was able to see the difference between the Christ of the scriptures and the Christ that we have kind of propped up as like a politicized, commercialized version. And
okay, so I think that that's really, really helpful, at least for me. Part of my faith story has been disconnecting the associations of Jesus and like this Americanized white version of Jesus that I grew up in. And every context has a different version of Jesus. And I think in America, it's easy to point out the kind of like the white Jesus kind of deal, but every single context has this kind of portrayal of Jesus that they present. And for me, and I think what he's getting at here that is really helpful for people, and I hope it can be helpful for you if you're struggling with this, is how do you connect like Jesus simply to who he is in the Gospels and simply the words that he taught, the way that he treated people, the way that he lived, and how can you connect to that Jesus as you're maybe deconstructing or reconstructing?
And I said, oh, I don't want the politicized, commercialized stuff, but I do want Christ, and I do want his church, and I do want the fellowship and all of those particular things. So my heart goes out to everybody who's deconstructing because they're struggling through some hurt probably or some inconsistencies. But I would just, man, encourage you, man, God is real, God is here. I deconstructed only to reconstruct. Sometimes you got to tear down a moldy house and rebuild, but build on the foundation that is Christ. And I know that's hard to see sometimes because when you Google, like, all right, church, you get the same people telling you the same answers. And it's a long, ongoing process. Listen, I want to dive deeper into this whole topic, and I'm going to do that on my Patreon, so make sure.
So, yeah, he kind of wraps it up as like he went through deconstruction, he went through reconstruction now, and like I mentioned on his album, he has a song called Deconstruction where he talks through, how he was a part of this church culture that where everything is portrayed and given to you in a very specific set of answers and descriptions, which can make it really difficult for the person that feels like those answers are no longer helpful anymore. So the last clip I want to look at is one by a guy named Pete Enns. And Pete Enns, when I began my journey of like kind of thinking through like, how do I view the Bible? How do I view God? I read a book by him called Inspiration and Incarnation, which is it's a book that he got pretty popular through where he kind of observes some passages in the Old Testament. I'll actually put a link to that book in the description below. Really helpful for me. I really enjoyed reading it. It kind of sent me down a journey of asking even more questions. But he presents in this clip like his viewpoints on deconstruction. And so we've kind of see where some people view deconstruction as like this church hurt thing. Some people like Lecrae talk about it as like it's this infrastructure and this system that they are deconstructing, not necessarily Jesus. And at the same time, it can be easy to associate Jesus closely with that structure. And so people don't want anything to do with it. And P. Enns kind of approaches it from a more philosophical viewpoint. And this clip is actually taken from his Instagram where he has like 5 different kind of reasons or explanations about deconstruction. So let's check this out.
Over the years, I've found 5 things to be true about a deconstructing faith. First, deconstruction is not something we bring on ourselves or something we can control. It just happens. That's why I think it's better to think of deconstruction as a disorientation. It's sort of like waking up from anesthesia. Nobody says, oh, I'm waking up from anesthesia and I'm choosing to be disoriented. No. It's more like, what's happening to me now and when is it going to stop? When someone says they're deconstructing their faith, it implies control. They're deconstructing it. It implies that they're actively scrutinizing and interrogating what they've always believed, which is great. But that's a process that comes after disorientation, after experiencing a lonely, scary, dark night of the soul, as they say, that they didn't ask for. Deconstruction is not something that we will to do. Rather, it's something that cannot be rushed, scripted, or controlled. It just happens.
Yeah. So, I really appreciate this perspective on it because for the person that it just comes upon you and you're dealing with it and you're wrestling with it, it's completely normal. Like it's not something that you should be ashamed of. It can be scary and it can draw about like questions that you never thought you would have, and it may like change relationships that you have with people, and there is a lot that can come from it. But what I appreciate that PN says here is that deconstruction is not something that is like something you have control over at times, and it's not something you can necessarily pray your way out of. And so when he presents that, it's really helpful for me because for a little while I was kind of struggling with like, well, does this mean like that I don't have enough faith in Jesus? And I found that wasn't the case. It was just that I was thinking about things in a different way. Like my life had taken me in a bunch of different paths, and like things for me were just changing in the way in which I approached things. There were books that I was reading that changed the way in which I thought about things. There was classes that I took in my undergrad, and there's classes that I'm taking in seminary that kind of like, give me a different viewpoint on how to approach the scriptures and how to approach Jesus. And so for what Pete Enns presents, deconstruction is something that kind of just happens at times. And so these are these different kind of viewpoints on deconstruction. And if you're someone that's going through deconstruction, I don't think that it's because you didn't believe in Jesus in the first place. I don't really agree with the first video. And for you, if maybe you kind of relate to Lecrae in some ways, where he got sick of the structure and the infrastructure of the church, I completely get that. And I hope that you can find a community of people where there's much more smallness to it. And I think that is very helpful when you're trying to deal with these questions of your faith. And I think if you should be able to be spiritually honest anywhere, it should be within your community of faith. And deconstruction, like N says, is something that just kind of comes upon you at times. And it's not something you have a lot of control over. But my hope is that a channel like this and many other podcasts and YouTube channels can provide you resources as you're kind of working through these things. I'm going to put some descriptions or some links in the description below for some things that maybe can be helpful for you, some books that have helped me, some different things like that. What is your deconstruction thoughts? What are your thoughts on the word deconstruction? Leave some thoughts in the comments below. Shoot me a message on Instagram at Rethinking Christianity Podcast if you have any thoughts about it there. I'd love to hear more. Thank you for tuning into this video. I hope that it was helpful for you. Until next time, I'm Blake.